Okay, welcome to our positivity bias. We're on chapter 21, and the topic is obstacle or opportunity. And it's interesting. I had a conversation with someone just today, and while we were on the phone, his wife came home. She had just been fired.
Oh.
And she was to a certain degree devastated. She got into the Zoom picture together, and they shared with me what had happened, and I said, "Mazel tov, that's wonderful." And she looked at me like I'd lost a couple of screws.
Did she just hang up on you? Did she just hang up on you when you did that?
No, I said, but we've talked before. She knows my attitude, and she smiled, and then we went into a conversation about 45 minutes about, she knew this was not her dream job, and she knew that she was going to change at some point. But there's oftentimes an inertia of leaving what you've got to try and do something else, even if you don't want to stay.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes God provides that opportunity by not waiting for us to do it. And the person that she was fired from, it was a business decision, a business challenge, not about her. It was about cutting down staff. And he said that, he was going to help with all the benefits that she can, get on the way out, but also that he would give her a wonderful review and list on the resume and things like that. So it was, he definitely felt guilty about letting her go, but bottom line, it was a business decision. It's not about her. And so in that sense, that's a great time to leave too. Because if you quit someplace, they always wonder about you, right? So, and then of course, if you get fired because of your behavior, that's not good.
Not necessarily. I quit my job at Cable Corporation to go to the university, and I quit in a bit of a huff because I didn't like what that outfit had turned into. But they insisted that I didn't quit. I retired. So I told them that's fine.
Very good. So that's the question then, right? Like every time we face these difficulties, are they problems? Are they obstacles, or are they an opportunity? Is this a golden chance, right? And it really comes back to how we see things. So I want to share a couple of stories that highlight the difference between Emunah and B'tochen. Emunah is faith, and B'tochen is trust, and kind of what the differences are. And I remember my my rabbinical college days, and just getting married and at earlier stages. A friend of mine, he said, the difference between faith and B'tochen is that when the rent is due and you don't have the money, faith is that the money will come. B'tochen is you go ahead and write the check. That's trust. That's a whole different level, right? And so I want to share a couple of stories from the Talmud and then kind of analyze these stories. And I think we've talked about these stories before, so they could be familiar stories, but let's review them because they're worthwhile. So the first story is and not in chronological order, but the first story is Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was the time after the destruction of the Second Temple. It was a time when Jerusalem had been laid waste, and he was out traveling, and he was coming to a town, and he had with him he had his donkey, and he had a rooster to wake him up in the morning, and his lantern and things and food. He gets to the first house in the town, and he asks for the opportunity to stay overnight. They have a guest room for him or something. No. How about the barn? No. And he went through town, house after house in the town, not a big town, but he went from place to place in town, and no one would give him room. Every time he said that everything God does is for the good. Everything God does is for the good. So he ended up on the outside of town, on the other side of town, and he ended up staying in the woods. He stayed in the woods just outside of town. During the night, a lion came and it killed his donkey. Everything God does is for the good. a fox came by and snatched off his hen, his rooster, but everything God does is for the good. And wind blew up and blew out his light, his source of light. Everything God does is for the good. He wakes up in the morning to horrific sounds. And basically the Roman legion had come and laid waste to the village. And it was all burning and screaming, and everyone was pillaged and plundered. And he realized that had he found a room in town, he'd be there. Had the donkey brayed, he would have been found. If the rooster had crowed, he might have been heard. If his light was seen, he might have been killed. All of these things were for his benefit. He didn't feel it at the time. He didn't see it at the time. But in retrospect now, everything God does is for the good. Sometimes we don't get to see it. Sometimes we don't get to see the good. But the fact that he said that everything God does is for the good, that in and of itself was merit to be able to get to see the actual good, to actually see what he had trusted in, and see the fruition of that. You know, wasn't that he had actually been saved in each instance, right? Another story. This is a story that happens earlier in time. This is before the destruction of Jerusalem. Romans are still coming in. They're still running in charge. And they put a decree against Jerusalem. And the community gathers funds, and they gather a committee, and they send the committee to go to Rome and try and bribe the emperor to erase the decree. Well, the guy was chosen to lead the group. His name was Nachum, and he had a nickname, Nachum ish Gamzu, Nachum the Gamzu guy, because his phrase every time something seemed wrong was Gamzu l'tova, that this too is for the good. And in his story, the Gemara says that in his story, they gathered the gold and silver, they put it in a chest, they sent the committee. En route, the committee stayed at a different inn, and at some place, the innkeeper caught on to what was going on, and he literally, middle of the night, stole all the jewels and silver and replaced in the box sand. In the morning, they get up and they start to head out. The innkeeper is long gone. They feel the chest and realize it's not what it was, and open it up. And Nachum ish Gamzu said, Gamzu l'tova. This too is for the good. And so they went off to Rome. They come to Rome, they get to the emperor, and they present their gift to the emperor. And of course, the emperor is not impressed. I mean, that's like bringing coals to Newcastle, right? So the emperor opens up even if they had brought jewels, it would have been like bringing coal to Newcastle if they brought jewels, right? But here it was sand, so that's already an insult. And the emperor was irate. But one of the advisors said, you know, the Jews are not known to be a stupid people. This doesn't really make sense. You know, in their heritage, they have a story about Abraham, the founding father, the father of Judaism, that he had gone to war against 5 kings, and that he had thrown sand in battle and it turned into projectiles. And he won. Maybe this is some of that sand. So there was never any lack of warring opportunities in the Roman Empire. And so they sent him off to the battlefield. And Kachava, so it was. It worked. It worked. Miraculously, it worked. And of course, this was really impressive. This was not just a bundle of jewels and gold. This was unique, and this was something special. And so the emperor was thoroughly impressed, and he not only ripped up the decree against Jerusalem, but he even sent them back with a chest full of gold and silver.
Hope they didn't stay at the same inn.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Although that guy was long gone anyway, right?
That was the Ritz-Carlton of the desert.
So the Talmud wants to ask a question. When you look at these two stories, you see a similarity in that they absolutely had trust in God. But one of the distinctions was that Rabbi Akiva said everything God does is for the good. It may not be now, but it will be for the good. Nachum Ish Gamza was saying present perfect. That this is great. This is great. This is good. This itself, this is good. This is also good. So he saw the present perfect as absolutely God's gift. Even when it didn't feel good, it didn't look good. This is great. And he was able to merit that things would turn out good, but they would actually be revealed great. And so it's commensurate with the trust. How much do we trust? Do we say that it will be for the good? Or do we see the inherent possibility of good here in the moment? And that's a big difference. Is this the obstacle or is this the opportunity? How do we see it? And that's an area that we want to be leaning into. One of the distinctions that the Lubavitcher Rebbe talks about between the two stories is that Rabbi Akiva was after the Churban Bayis, after the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash. He was already living in a time of Roman exile. And so maybe he couldn't see the good as clearly as Nachum Ish Gamzu, who lived during the time when the temple was standing, and there was open revealed miracles every day in the temple itself. So the Rebbe encourages us that in our times, when we're already at the footsteps of Mashiach and prophecy is returning to the world, and therefore we see, the possibility for good in a way that's never been seen before, we have to behave like Nachum Ish Gamzu. We have to have the betachon, the trust that present perfect, it is good. Now, obviously, it's not always easy to see that. In fact, sometimes it's really hard to see that. But again, we go back to the question of, I don't understand God. Well, if you did, would you worship him? I mean, if you understood God, you would be God, and that wouldn't be the same thing. So the idea is that we are finite human beings. There's no way we're going to understand God, but that doesn't mean it's not all good. It just means we don't understand it. And again, the difference between a child and an adult. The child's playing with a shiny toy and enjoying it, and the adult comes along and takes it away because it's actually a sharp knife. The child doesn't understand and screams and cries. The adult understands that this is good. I just saved you, right? And the difference between the child and the adult is a matter of years in education. It could be 20 years later, that little kid is now smarter than the adult. That's finite and finite. But the difference between us and God is the difference between finite and infinite. So why would we think that we could understand God? But we have to have the betachon, the trust that it's Gam Zulatova, this is good. And that's a part of what this chapter is about. And one of the stories it talks about was during the 1960s, when the younger generation was not trusting anybody over 30. Don't raise your hand if you remember these days. But it was interesting because at a conclave of Jewish leaders, that the future of Judaism looked very bleak, and people were very worried, and there was a tremendous loss to society in a lot of different areas, right? But at the same time, what the Rebbe saw, what the Rebbe talked about, was tremendous opportunity, because here was a generation that was comfortable with the idea of change, that was comfortable with the idea of change, even if it meant discomfort in their own lives, discomfort with their family, discomfort with their living style, discomfort with their financial state. They were fine living up to ideals that didn't fit the norm, and they were okay with that, which means that if they could be directed towards good things, then they could take huge strides, because Like we talked about the person who doesn't want to quit a job they don't want to do because, status quo. You don't want to leave a decent thing because you don't know what the future, right? So we have this, this hesitation to move on. But here was a generation that was ready to move on. And that would provide tremendous opportunity. And as we have seen, not only did it not pave a way for worse Jewish life, but it was the beginning of a Baal Tshuva movement, a movement of returning to the traditional ways of Judaism in a way that hadn't been for quite some time. And so what to the rest of the world seemed to be a horrific situation, the Rebbe saw as tremendous opportunity, a tremendous opportunity to bring Mashiach so much closer, because the people were open to a lot of big changes, big changes. So one of the stories that's one of my favorite stories, and I've definitely quoted this many times before, but here is more in writing, right? This section is called "A Tree Grows in Brooklyn," right?
Mhm.
So for many of you, Shirley Chisholm was elected to the 1968 to represent the New York's 12th congressional district, which included the neighborhood of Crown Heights, which where the Lubavitch movement is, right? And she made headlines as the first African-American woman ever elected to Congress. And so she was looking forward to tremendous opportunities, an opportunity to make some really serious changes, and she was very excited about it. And then when she got there into Congress, they put her in the Agricultural Committee.
Mhm.
Yeah, a girl from Brooklyn. Great. And she saw herself as being basically placed in a corner where she could have no impact. And she was angry and she was depressed. But she got a call from the Lubavitcher Rebbe's secretarial staff saying that the Lubavitcher Rebbe would like to see you if you could come visit. And so she comes to see the Rebbe, and the Rebbe tells her, Mazel Tov, congratulations, what a tremendous opportunity you have. And she's like, sir, do you know what they did to me? Are you aware that they stuck me in a agricultural committee? And the Rebbe said, yes, absolutely. What a fantastic opportunity. This country has had so much surplus food, and yet there's so many hungry people. You can use this gift, this opportunity that God has given you in your current position to feed hungry people, to make the connection between surplus and hungry. And tasked with that charge, Shirley Chisholm happened to meet Senator Bob Dole on her first day in Washington. He was looking for help for the Midwestern farmers who were losing money on their crops. There was this huge surplus of unsold food. They don't know what to do with. And Shirley Chisholm thought, the Rebbe's advice. And during the next few years, and for the duration of the 1970s, Chisholm worked to expand the National Food Stamp Program, which allowed poor Americans to buy subsidized food from Midwestern farmers. And finally, in 1973, the Agriculture and Consumer Protection Act mandated that food stamps be made available to every jurisdiction in the United States. She and Senator Dole went on to co-create the Special Supplemental Nutrition Program for Women, Infants, and Children, the WIC program, which today benefits more than 8 million people across the country every month.
Mhm.
Shirley Chisholm's words at her retirement party, I owe all this to a rabbi who was an optimist, who taught me that from what you think is a challenge is actually a gift from God. And if poor babies have milk and poor children have food today, it's because of this rabbi in Crown Heights and his vision. So again, we go back to the idea is if we have a God that loves us and cares about us, none of what we go through is truly negative. It is only for our benefit. It's only for opportunities. And we have to see it as an opportunity. Now, yes, there'll be a challenge, but a challenge is an opportunity. And we know that, for example, the word in Hebrew nisayon, which means a test, is related to the word lenasos, to lift up. Every test, every challenge is an opportunity to lift us up to a whole new plateau. If we're willing to accept the challenge.
You're muted.
You're frozen.
The lips are moving, but we hear no sound.
Testing, 1, 2, testing.
You got it.
All right, now we're back. So I should play that.
Hear no evil, see no evil.
So again, it comes down to that final line, is that, do we see every situation as a challenge, an opportunity, something we can actually do something with? The more difficult and challenging it is, the greater the opportunity it really is. And if we see it that way and we lean into it and embrace it, then it can become phenomenal. It become tremendous results. Gam Zula Tova, present perfect. This is absolutely great. Sometimes it's challenging. But if we approach it with the attitude, then God willing, we'll have the opportunity to have the goodness inherent in it to be revealed openly.